Hello, welcome back to Wicca 101. I'm Brigantia Blackbird. This week's lesson is going to focus on the Wiccan Rede, and I mean specifically the long Rede. Now, most times when people talk about the Wiccan Rede, they're talking about a little blurb of a sentence or a little teensy tiny paragraph of text. But that is not what we are about to get into today, so if you haven't already gotten comfortable, stop the video, get yourself a drink, get yourself a snack if you think you need one, because we're going to be chatting for a little bit. Now, the reason why I'm choosing the long Wiccan Rede is because it really encapsulates Wicca as a whole. It is Wicca in a nutshell. The long version covers the main principles and practices of Wicca. If you can remember the long Rede, or at least just remember the principles of it, you can construct an entire Wiccan practice around it. That's how powerful this is, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's well worthy of our attention in this class. Now, the long Rede was written as a poem by a woman who was called Adriana Porter. She died in 1946, so this has been around for a while. Her granddaughter, a woman who is, she's since passed away. She was called Lady Gwen Thompson during her life, at least within Wiccan circles. She published this Rede in a publication called The Green Egg in 1975, and she said that this is what she had inherited from her grandmother and her grandmother's practice. The language of the poem was written in a pseudo-archaic style, like a modern-day attempt at Shakespearean language, and that was pretty usual for the time. It's what was popular. When I wrote down the Rede for my own grimoire, I simplified the language as much as I could, because I don't really think we gain points for trying to mimic Shakespearean language. I think the purpose of language is to communicate, and to communicate as clearly as we can. So I simplified it, and I also restructured the order of the stanzas. Sometimes different aspects of the Rede, they were scattered around when they could have been grouped more efficiently, and just make better sense and have a better flow. So I've done that. And I haven't just used this particular Rede. I've also drawn from other sources because it has evolved and people have made additions, made subtractions. I have made a particular addition of my own for this one. So as you get better acquainted with the Rede, you'll see that this has been a process of evolution. And that's why I want to do much more than and a harm none, do what you will, and just have a 10-minute discussion about that and then be done with it. I think it's genuinely worthwhile to look at the whole thing and do a deep dive. So without further ado, let's get started, and by all means, make yourself comfy. So everything in this poem is divided up into couplets, and I've divided those couplets into different sections. Now, couplets 1 through 12 cover some of the Wiccan basics and a little bit of homespun philosophy thrown in. So we'll look at them one at a time. First couplet: bide within the law you must, in perfect love and perfect trust. This right off the get-go communicates to the reader that there are standards, there are requirements, that there are things that we hold ourselves accountable for. This is a little bit less than getting in trouble with the god and the goddess, or with other practitioners, or with the world in general. This is about the importance of training your own conscience. The reference to perfect love and perfect trust represents the relationship between the god and the goddess, an act of faith that they intend things for our good, that even when we experience difficulties and setbacks, it's all about us learning lessons that will ultimately benefit us and make us better people, and trusting that process. Second couplet: live you must and let to live, fairly take and fairly give. If you're a fan of Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, you'll know one of the expressions they used over and over again was equivalent exchange. Essentially, you have to be able to give in order to get. You have to be able to respect others in order to have them respect you. There's reciprocity about this. The Christians would put it a different way with their golden rule. As you would have others do unto you, do unto others. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That sort of thing. It is about respect, and respect towards all. Next, cast the circle thrice about to keep unwelcome spirits out. Casting a circle for rituals and for serious spell work, that is very much a Wiccan custom. It's something we have in common with ceremonial magicians. Only with ceremonial magicians, usually they're casting a circle to contain something, whereas in Wicca, we are casting a circle to erect our own personal temple And those of us and anyone we're practicing with, we are inside of that temple. It gives us essentially energetic shelter. Now, the reason why it's 3 is because 3 represents completion. It represents the 3 main phases of the goddess. It's about getting a job thoroughly done. You'll see 3 having significance in other aspects of life. In storytelling with trilogies, beginning, middle, and end, and everything is structured around that. Let's see, what's another good example of 3s? Well, there's the Christians, of course, have their Trinity, 3s. 3s are something that come up over and over again. It crosses religious lines, it crosses cultural lines. And of course, with 3, you are going to find that happening a lot and a lot within Wicca. Keeping unwelcome spirits out, that's a little gentle reminder that not every unseen entity out there is our friend or is inclined to be friendly towards us. And I don't say this to alarm anyone, but simply let's be realistic. Some things are bad-tempered, some things are actively practice evil, and it never hurts to protect yourself. Going on, to bind the spell well every time, let the spell be said in rhyme. Now, this has been misinterpreted by some by saying that it's a requirement to make your spells rhyme. That's not what this is talking about. The purpose of structuring your spells into such a way as they rhyme whenever possible is simply as a memory aid. It also helps with flow. When things rhyme, there's usually a little bit of rhythm in the saying, and when you do that, it's another way of helping your brain remember. I don't always make my spells rhyme. Sometimes it is coming completely off the cuff and it's just off the top of my head. And sometimes people, they write their spells down, but they don't really go to the effort of rhyming. And as long as you remember it and you were able to stay focused, then that's all well and good. But as a memory aid, working with rhyming spells can be extremely helpful. And it's not something to be rejected just because we're feeling lazy. Oh, so many of the objections that people have about Wicca, it really does come back around to the idea of they're just too lazy to do something. But that's a discussion for another time. Moving on. Soft of eye and light of touch, speak little and listen much. This is about a general attitude in life. Being soft of eye, it's about looking through things through a kind lens, of not assuming the absolute worst, which can be difficult these days. Being light of touch, not being heavy-handed with our magic, having some restraint, having an understanding that we don't need to go around meddling in everything to somehow prove ourselves. We use magic with purpose, we use it with actual intent, and we use it in conjunction with mundane actions. It's not about trying to cannonball our way through lives. It is about working within the natural order. And of course, with speaking little and listening much, anyone would say we probably do need to all listen more than what we speak. That's just general life advice. Going on, Lord and Lady always be praised. Through their might, great power is raised. The god and the goddess, they are certainly the source of all divine power. Everything comes through them. Even ourselves, we are reflections of them. And it is our connection with them on the spiritual level that enables us to access this divine energy, as well as making use of our own. Certainly they do deserve to be praised for this. They are the means by which everything keeps in motion and keeps functioning. If you can't find anything to admire about that, then this probably isn't the religion for you. Next couplet. Honor the old ones in deed and name. Let love and life be our guides again. Certainly we should have greater respect for the elderly, particularly those who have lived their lives in such a way to where they have gained experience and they have gained knowledge. Now, people can manage to go through lives and be just as much of a fool at 50 as they were at 20. However, those who have not gone that route, who actually made use of their time and lived life in a fashion that was actually admirable, they are going to have honor, and if nothing else, they managed to survive longer than we have. That is worthy of some respect. With love and light being our guides, this goes back a little bit to the idea of the witch's pyramid, because if you'll recall from that lesson, we talked about how the witch's pyramid is intended to be filled with love, and that love is what gives shape, structure, and form to everything else. And with light, of course, in order to be guided, we have to be able to see where we are going, which is why light is an apt metaphor. Light is also, in the context of the craft, about the projective, being proactive, taking action, doing something. So, There's a lot just in these little stanzas, isn't there? Respect for those who are older than we are or who are more experienced than we are in the craft, and also remembering that our center should be loved, and by making use of the light and of proactive energy to get things done. Wicca is not a spectator sport. It is not for those who are inclined to be passive. It is for doers. Next, in love you must always be true unless your love proves false to you. Doesn't require much explanation. Essentially, if you are in a relationship with someone, do right by them. Now, if they decide not to do right by you, and if it's something serious like infidelity, then it is time to part company. There are limitations on our romantic attachments. It is dependent entirely upon how both parties treat one another, and if it is in accordance with standards that both are agreeable to. It doesn't work any other way. You never have an obligation to remain in an abusive relationship or in a relationship in which someone is not fulfilling their part, which is a whole other discussion. We can get into that in other videos. Let's see. Next, scroll down a little bit. With the fool no season spend, nor be counted as his friend. Oh, yes. You know that judgment that people are so allergic to these days? And they keep telling you that there's no place for judgment ever in the craft? I beg to differ. In order to know that someone is a fool is essentially to pronounce judgment on them, saying that they are not using any wisdom they might have, they are not using their reasoning capacities, they are not taking into account the consequences of their actions. And so, of course, someone like that is not going to help us very much in life. And the more we get involved in their affairs, the more messy things become. We can all make messes by ourselves. We don't really need outside influences to help us with that. And as far as not being counted as their friend, I think we need to start making an intellectual distinction between having universal benevolence towards people and universal friendship. With universal benevolence, it means that you have a general goodwill towards your fellow humankind, and that you hope that they are also, that they will be all right, that their needs will be taken care of, and that they are living the best lives that they can. It's, you're not actively wishing harm upon anyone or hating anyone or anything of that kind. But with friendship, you're more invested. There's an emotional attachment. And not only is it not practical or honest to say that you have universal friendship for everyone, it doesn't make sense to do so. Why would you be friends? Why would you be tied up in the affairs and want to be close to someone who could be abusive towards you, or who is dragging you down, or who's trying to prevent you from fulfilling your own obligations or even your own ambitions? Something to think about there. Judgment exists. People can say that it shouldn't be done and it should be rejected entirely, but think about some of the people who preach non-judgment the loudest. I bet you can find times when they have pronounced judgment and did so very decisively. When people dislike judgment, essentially what they're meaning is, I don't want anyone to condemn me for things that might very well be questionable, if not outright immoral. That's what people are talking about not wanting judgment. Most of the time. Exceptions, but that's most of the time. Next couplet. When misfortune is enow, wear the blue star upon your brow. So when we are going through difficulties, the idea of wearing the blue star, that would refer to, of course, the pentacle. The pentacle is a powerful symbol of protection. Many of us, when we anoint ourselves at the beginning of rituals, a lot of times the pentacle is a symbol that we will use. The reference to blue is because blue is associated with a lot of different goddesses, and in particular the goddess. And I think it was actually legends having to do with Avalon and the priestesses of that particular island. I think blue was a particular color for them. And I think it was actually in Miriam Bradley's book, Myths of Avalon, where she talked about, I don't think it was tattooed, but certainly stained areas of the priestesses' foreheads. But it wasn't stars. I think it was moon symbols. So that has that to do with. Okay, next. When you have and hold a need, hearken not to others' greed. I think this has more to do with the use of responsible magic than it does for anyone else. Some people treat witchcraft as if they're just a hired gun, and whoever hires them and pays the money for whatever it is that they're needing, they're more than happy to do it. They don't see how the consequences could possibly affect them. I've actually heard people argue like, well, it's the person who commissioned the curse who's really going to feel the effects of it. And I thought, really? So if there's an assassin and they're hired by someone to kill another person, I mean, yes, the person who gave the order needs to be held criminally responsible and face the consequences, but the assassin is still the one who pulled the trigger. The person who commissioned it could not have gotten it done without the actions of the assassin. So I do not hold to the argument that we could just view ourselves as hired guns, and if someone is willing to pay us money, well, there's no reason why we shouldn't use our magic for that end, or even ask questions about whether or not this is intended for good or ill. Nonsense. We are responsible for what we do. Next, and that's the last couplet of this section, is merry meet and merry part, brighten the cheeks and warm the hearts. This, of course, has to do with witchy gatherings and gathering with those who are pagan or at least spiritually like-minded. We are social creatures as human beings, even for those of us who are introverts. And sometimes it just does us a little bit of good to gather together. And essentially, that's what we're doing on the Discord server at Blackbird's Brew. We live many states apart, most of us, but thanks to technology, we can come together, we can have voice chats, and sometimes it's just good to have that association. Now, this brings us to couplets 13 through 18, and this is all focused on moon lore. So this will have to do with the Espot celebrations and working with the magic of the moon. So here's the first one of that. Jessel go by the waxing moon, sing and dance the witch's rune. Now, before we get into it, Jessel is spelled Deosil. However, the books on my shelf tell me that it is not pronounced Dessel, but it is pronounced Jessel for something to do with, I think, Celtic. And yeah, just go with it. It's how it's supposed to be pronounced without getting into a lecture about etymology or ancient pronunciations or anything else. It's just what's done. But the meaning of the word jessel is to move in a clockwise fashion. So when the moon is growing, you go around the circle in a clockwise fashion. Singing and dancing the witch's rune is one of the methods by which we raise power in order to perform our spells. Next, widdershins go when the moon does wane, and the werewolf howls by the dread wolfsbane. Widdershins means counterclockwise. So when the moon is waning, or when you are trying to do a banishing, if you are conducting funeral rites, what you would do is you would walk the circle in a clockwise fashion because you are sending something away. And oftentimes when we're sending something away, it's because we perceive that thing as harmful. Maybe someone threw some nasty energy at us. Maybe there's a problem. We're trying to put some distance between us. The idea of the werewolf howling and the wolfsbane, this is about things that we fear, things that could cause us problems, things that could hurt us. And that is why it's being used in this context of send that energy away from you. Protect yourself, in other words. Next, when the lady's moon is new, kiss the hand to her times two. One of the Wiccan traditional greetings of the moon is that when you see her in the sky, not only when it's new, but especially when it's new, you kiss the back of your hand, like so, blow a kiss just like a kid would, up at the moon as a way of greeting the lady. When the bow rides in the eve, plan what you would achieve. This is still within the waxing moon, when we're kind of in that first quarter building towards the full moon. This is still planning stages. This is about your intentions and setting things in motion. Next, as the moon ascends to her peak, then your heart's desire seek. The full moon is when you really get your work done. It's when you are trying to set things in absolute motion, get that manifestation, get the job done. And next, last the sickle shows her face, release the old with proper grace. This is, of course, the waning moon, and this is about, again, getting rid of things, letting things go, putting things back in their proper order, and dispensing with things that we don't particularly need weighing us down. So that's how we use the moons, and it has a lot to do with how our Espots are really structured in ritual, which we'll get into that in future videos. And now for couplets 19 through 22, the four winds. Heed the north wind's mighty gale, lock the door and trim the sail. For those of us who live in the northern hemisphere, we know how powerful and how chilly that north wind can be. One of the members of Blackbird's Brew lives in Minnesota, and she is very well acquainted with Arctic air, and she can attest to this. When we are faced with that coldness, that power, locking the door, trimming the sail. Trimming the sail, of course, refers to sailing, but locking the doors mean shutting that out, protecting yourself, taking precautionary measures. Next, wind blowing from the east, expect the new and set the feast. So whenever you have an easterly wind, you might be thinking that's something new is coming out on the horizon. Next, gusting wind comes from the south, then love will kiss you on the mouth. The direction of south is associated with the element of fire, and of course, fire is associated with passion and energy and drive, romance. That's the reference to love kissing you on the mouth. If you are on the lookout for a lover and asking for the wind to give you a sign, a southerly wind might just be that sign that you're seeking, that you're about to meet someone nice. Then when the weird whispers from the west, no departed spirits are restless. The west is associated with the entrance to the other world, that gateway. So when things are all figgledy-piggledy over there, and especially at this time of year when the veil is thin anyways, departed spirits, souls, non-corporated entities, they're getting a little feisty. They're doing some stuff, and you can feel that. Now for the couplets 23 through 37. This has to do with sacred woods and a little bit of nature lore. It begins, 9 woods in the cauldron go, burn them quick and burn them slow. The 9 woods in the cauldron. This means that we are using them in our potions and our mixtures. This isn't just about what we are burning, although we do sometimes burn them literally within the cauldron. This is about utilizing their energies. So these are the 9 most sacred woods within Wicca. Some of them do burn quickly, some of them do burn slowly. That will affect the timing of manifestation. If you're using quick burning woods, you're probably going to be encouraging a faster response. For things that need to play out over the long term, they will tend to burn a little bit longer. Next, hawthorn, grape, fire, good lord, fir. Wouldn't it be wonderful if I could type and have better notes? Anyway, hawthorn, grape, fir, apple, too, all are sacred woods to you. So those are our first 4. So hawthorn, grape, fir, and the apple. Apple, of course, is obvious, Avalon. Then we have willow, hazel, rowan, birch, and oak will guide your every search. So these are our main ones. These are the ones that we're going to be using and burning in and out of the cauldron. Next, remember elder is the lady's tree. Burn it not, or cursed you'll be. Now, I didn't realize until I read A Wiccan Bible by A.J. Drew that one of the reasons for this particular stanza is because the smoke of elder, when it burns, is particularly toxic to humans. I mean, of course, obviously, we shouldn't be breathing in smoke. It's not the friendliest thing to be doing to our lungs. But the other smokes, they're not as toxic to us, that it's not going to immediately harm us the way that elder smoke would. At least that was according to A.J. Drew. So the curse is essentially self-inflicted by doing something that is very harmful to our bodies and taking those toxics in and problems and no good. Next, we get into the individual woods. Okay, so birchwood in the fire goes to tell us what the lady knows. So divination, particularly when we are asking the goddess for answers or guidance. Oak in the forest towers with might. In the fire, it brings the Lord's insight. Again, referring to divination, but also one of the titles of the god is the Oak King. And of course, it is also a tree that was extremely sacred to both our ancient and our modern cousins, the Druids. Oak trees, they have a unique quality in which their root system is almost as vast and complex and spreads out as deep and as far as they are tall and wide above the ground. They're a very good metaphor for as above, so below. Next, we have rowan is a tree of power, causing life and magic to flower. Very useful for magic wands is rowan, and it is focused more so on manifesting things on this side of the veil. Next, we have willows at the water stand to guide us to the summerland. Willows, one of the reasons why we often see them by bodies of water, besides the fact that they love water and they look very graceful next to it aesthetically, but it is also because of that representation of that gateway to the other world. We see that also by the water. We've just established that the element of water is associated with that in-between area where the spirits kind of drift back and forth. So that's all tied up in that symbolism. Summerland, of course, is one of the names for the Celtic afterlife. It's a concept that has also taken root in Wicca, which we will get into all that in other videos. Hawthorn burned to purify and draw fairy to the eye. The hawthorn tree has a very strong relationship to the fae in general, so if you are wanting to work with them or at least show your respects to them, hawthorn is going to become particularly important to you. Next, Hazel, the wisdom and learning of the sage, lends strength to those of honored age. Hazel, that takes us to legends about the salmon, and of course, the salmon being able to tell King Arthur where the god Mabon was so he could be released, and he was wise, and he had learned a lot, and it all is wrapped up in that ancient Celtic mythology, lending strength to those who are older. That might be something if we are finding ourselves getting up in years. Working with the hazel, that can help, give us a little bit more oomph, at least on the energetic level. Next, white the flowers of apple tree that brings the holy gift of fecundity. So apples are a very strong fertility symbol. They are also a symbol of protection because when you have them, their seeds form a pentagram within them, and of course that is protective in and of itself. And then you have their association with Avalon, which is another metaphor for the other world or the Summerland, which is where things go after they die, and then they sit in that cauldron for a little bit, and then they get reborn. So it's tied up in life, death, and rebirth. Next, grape grows upon the vine, giving sacred gifts of joy and wine. Pretty self-evident. Fir, the evergreen, proclaims life despite all strife. Evergreens, because their ability to retain their leaves, or I suppose their needles more properly, as well as their abilities to go through the winter without any issues. It is about survival. It is about the perpetuation of our spirit, no matter what physical incarnations that we have. So that's why that's important. Next, heed the flower, bush, and tree. By the Lord and Lady blessed you'll be. Use your magical correspondences. That is what that is all about. Everything we see in nature, flowers, bushes, trees, animals, crystals, everything, it has magical properties. And when we incorporate these things into our spell, we are incorporating that energy into it. I've said in other videos that when we use correspondences with our spells, we are accessing the energies that are latent within those materials, and we are essentially drawing upon their power like batteries and directing it towards a particular intention. That way you're not just going in with your own energy, you're not necessarily having to nag one god or goddess to also lend their aid. You are making full use of the resources around you. And of course, to do this requires study, education, practice, trial and error, all the stuff that people are too often too lazy or don't feel like doing. And then the last couplet of this particular section is, where the rippling waters flow, cast a stone, and truth you'll know. This, of course, has to do with divination, but it also has to do with analysis and having the wisdom to see what is the most logical and natural way for events to evolve. When we cast a stone into a literal body of water, it makes ripples. So too, when we see people or organizations taking certain actions in life, especially as we gain more life experience and we've noticed certain patterns with people, we can see those ripples from the get-go, and we can form a pretty educated guess about where those ripples are going to go and what kind of effects it's going to have. Important stuff to keep in mind. Next, Wheel of the Year. And this will be couplets 38 through 46. It begins, 8 spokes on the wheel do turn, each moment is a chance to learn. So we have 8 Sabbats. Those are the Wiccan holidays that are also very relevant to people in Celtic paths, Nordic paths. A lot of people who work with other pantheons outside of those, they tend to adapt these so it's relevant to the mythology they're drawing upon. But every single Sabbat, it represents a time in life, a moment of energy, a kind of thing, and it is all about getting attuned with those, flowing with the natural rhythms of life, and gaining experience and wisdom from them. Next, the god is reborn at every Yule, like the log, the horned one rules. Yule is absolutely the time for the rebirth of the god. It's also the winter solstice. After the after the winter solstice, the sun is going to start gaining in strength. And of course, the sun is also another strong symbol for the god. Lighting a Yule log is a custom of very long standing in Northern European traditions, both pagan and Christian households. And it's something that once I have a fireplace of my own, I intend to do. Next, we have how the time of Imbolc glows, water for flowers through the snows. Imbolc is it's the seed of spring. It is the dream of spring. It's when we just see a little bit of give in winter's thaw. In some areas of the world, there are actual very hardy flowers that literally do come up through the snow and bloom and say, you know what, winter, your days are numbered and my days are a-coming. It's just a symbol that the earth is starting to wake up again. Next, fair Astara blows away and the night equals day. Astara, which is in March in the northern hemisphere, that is kind of a windy, gusty time of year, at least where I live. And with the night equaling day, that is, of course, a balance between literal light and darkness. It is also the balance between projective and receptive energies. And once we get past Astara, the projective energies are going to start having a greater importance. They're going to be holding more sway. We get into more of the action part of the year rather than the more contemplative part of the year. Next, Lord and Lady marry at warmth's return, time to let Beltane fires burn. Beltane is the time for the marriage of the goddess and the god. It's just flowers are exploding, animals are having babies, everything's come to life, everything's just in full tilt, and of course, burning fires is one of the customs at this time. Next, at Letha, the sun is at its height, time for oak and holly to fight. Letha is the summer solstice. That's when we have the sun at its absolute height. And that is also the time when the Oak King and the Holly King have their symbolic fight. The Oak King will lose, and the Holly will rule until the winter solstice, when at that time the Oak King is then reborn. You see how this all flows together very nicely. Next, the harvest of Lunasa is near. First fruits and grains yield good cheer. And that is what Lunasa is a little bit about. Just as Imbolc is that first dream of spring, that first little hint of it, Lunasa is in turn that first taste of the autumn, a little bit of the harvesting. It's about things are about to shift into high gear. Things are going to start going in this direction. We are now getting to reap everything that we have sown. Next, the god falls at second reaping. Mabon readies us for winter sleeping. Mabon is one of the traditional times where it is considered the death of the god and where he goes into the underworld to rule that particular area and wait until his rebirth at Yule. And of course, it is also a time of great preparation, setting back, your canned jars of food and everything else, making sure that your financials are in order so you're going to be able to make the payments for, higher fuel costs. It's all about that preparation and knowing what season we're about to get into. This is also a time of balance in which, the projective and receptive energies and the light and the day, they've been in pretty equal balance. And now after this point, we're going into the dark part of the year. We are going into a time when receptive and contemplative energy is going to hold sway. Then lastly, spirits roving when the season wanes, help us turn the wheel every Samhain. Of course, the spirits are roving because the veil is getting thin. I can feel it getting thinner right now. And of course, as you get more attuned with the energies of the year, it'll become easier for you to detect these things. That's why even people who are outside of paganism, they know that around Halloween, there's just a little certain something in the atmosphere. There's just something a little rowdy going on. But this is all part of the process. This takes us to the end of the wheel of the year where things have gone to rest. There's a symbolic death. People who have died throughout the year, they're being gathered into the other world if they haven't already made it there. And there's going to be a period of rest before the cycle begins again and life comes back to the earth. That's the wheel of the year. And next week we'll be getting into that a lot more. This is just a little taste. Then Couplets 47 to 50. This is the finale. We're going to get into some controversial territory here. First, lest in self-defense it be, ever mind the rule of three. The law of threefold returns essentially states that whatever you send out into the world is going to return threefold to you. And this is something that people argue against all the time. I've had a lot of tedious conversations over the past several years with a wide variety of people on a broad spectrum of social media platforms. There's a reason why this is so controversial. And I think a lot of that has to do because we live in a society that absolutely detests being held accountable. We like to hold other people accountable, but we don't like to hold ourselves accountable. It's a really bad, really immature, and really immoral habit. This is a reminder that we are accountable. Now, the reason why there's this proviso for self-defense is because if we are being attacked, whether it is magically or someone has physically attacked us, mugged us, harmed us in some way, then returning that energy and seeking out justice, that is when it is not wrong to engage in more, I would call it, aggressive forms of magic. I wouldn't even call it malicious, because let's go back to the mugging example. If I am mugged on the street and someone swipes my purse, they take, my money, my ID, and, they start wreaking havoc in my life, then, I'm going to do two things. One, I'm going to immediately inform the police, give them as good a description as I can, and try to have that person brought to justice through mundane means. But I am also going to be calling upon the gods saying, this person attacked me, it has caused these ill effects in my life, and I want to use all of that is within my power. Every means I have at my disposal to aid in the mundane efforts of bringing that person to justice, so that they can be punished, because justice does have a retributive quality. But the purpose of the punishment is to persuade people to not do it again. Now, this is quite different than if someone said, "My boyfriend cheated on me, and now I want to turn him into a toad." When it comes to our problems with human relations, unless someone is causing you physical harm or you have literally been going through a process of gaslighting and brainwashing, and I'm talking in the clinical sense, not in the teenage girl, he hurt all my feelings, and so now I'm going to make him into a monster. Not in that sense. That is not the time for any kind of aggressive magic. It is not the time for maliciousness. It's the time to realize that sometimes human relations don't work out very well, and people make mistakes, and they don't always make the most honorable choices, and that's just it. And we gotta learn how to suck that up. I hate to say it because, so many people will yell at me for this, but we have got to grow up. We cannot be tossing out malicious magic just because someone hurt our feelings. If we are using a form of magic that is legitimately of self-defense, we have to think about how would you justify that in a concrete case before a court of law. If you think in those terms, you will start seeing that there's a lot of things that occur in life that we really can let go, or we can address through mundane means. Do not get into the habit of cursing and hexing just because someone hurt your feels. That is not what Wicca is for. It is not what any form of witchcraft is for. And those teaching to the contrary are doing people a grave disservice. And they will answer to that. Maybe not to me, but sooner or later, we all shed our mortal coils, and we will be accountable to the gods. Keep it in mind. Next, another controversial issue. If in war, fight honorably and true, otherwise what you send out comes back to you. This is also tying in with the law of threefold return. I think we get confused, and we have learned not to tell the difference between how we behave in ordinary circumstances, how we behave in circumstances in which we are the victim of crime, and how we behave in wartime. If we are in ordinary circumstances and life is just kind of rolling along, nothing's really wrong, then there is no reason to be using magic to fight or to do anything aggressive or malicious. If we have been the victim of a crime, then there's something that we need to do to help bring someone to justice and get the treatment essentially that they deserve, because that is honorable, because it is necessary in a civilized society for bad behavior to be addressed, hopefully changed, and if not changed, then at least punished, because there are some people who, upon receiving a punishment, decide not to do that thing again, not because they've suddenly reformed their characters, but simply because they're avoiding punishment. It'd be better if they learned, but sometimes we'll take what we can get. But then there is wartime. War is not a civilized activity. War is not something in which you seek out a fair fight or in which there is any such thing as a fair fight. War is about your homeland being under direct attack and assault, and you doing your part, whether it is through mundane means of joining the army to defend it. There's a lot of things on the civilian level that can be done to support war efforts when the country is under direct attack. And there are also things that we can do magically. Even Gerald Gardner and his group, they have that famous story of during the Blitz, when the Nazis were coming over to bomb the shit out of London, they performed rituals, and there was someone who was willing to die in the course of that ritual to do what they could to defend their homeland. This does not violate the law of threefold return, because someone has already aggressed upon you. You are doing what you can to make that aggression cease. Now, if you are just tossing out horrible magic and you're just venting your spleen out onto the world, the reason why it's important to keep in mind the rule of return is because you are the aggressor. What you get back is the response to that aggression. And it can come in a variety of forms. It can, because one way the law of threefold of return will affect you will be on the levels of mind, body, and spirit. So your mental, your intellectual capacities, your physical being, and your spiritual well-being, you are going to feel the effects of it. So don't be surprised when it happens. No one's immune from that. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you plant seeds, what grows from that seed is going to be bigger than the initial seed itself. And I think that's what people overlook when they are thinking about the rule of three. They just think of, oh, well, I did one bad thing, so that doesn't mean three separate bad things are going to come back on me. And I'm thinking, you're looking at it wrong. When you've done something bad and you plant that seed of badness, what grows from that is going to be bigger, and it's going to take on a life of its own, and it may be a problem that's not within your power to solve. The best contemporary example I have of this is the COVID response. Do you remember last year? 2 weeks to flatten the curve. How long is 2 weeks exactly? Oh, that's right, 14 days. And where are we now? How are we living now? Look at the world. Did the world go back to as it was after those 2 weeks? Or do you keep getting deadline after deadline after deadline, and it just keeps rippling bigger and bigger and bigger? And now the problem is so huge, and it has revealed so many corrupt elements within society that you look at it, you're overwhelmed, and you're like, I don't know how to fix this. I certainly can't fix it on my own. That is the law of threefold return in action, plain as day for everyone to see. So bring that up the next time someone tries to argue about the validity of actions having consequences. And no matter what form, retribution comes in towards us, the idea that actions don't have consequences or that causes do not have effects, that goes contrary to the reality, the physical reality of the universe. So by those who are arguing against that, they are really telling you to ignore an aspect of nature that is observable and quantifiable. Call me crazy. That might be someone who maybe is a voice that's not particularly worth listening to. Food for thought. Okay. Next couplet. This lesson well you must learn. You only receive what you earn. I think that's a very important principle. Some religions say that, he who does not work should not eat. And I think to a certain extent that is true. I mean, we're not talking about someone who's injured or who's very elderly or who, can't look after themselves. We're talking about people who have every capability of looking after themselves and taking care of their own interest and managing their own affairs, but deciding that they don't feel like it and still expect the world to fall into their laps. And then they bitch and moan when that doesn't happen. And then they become socialists, and they say that how the government needs to take care of them and just tax the rich enough, and suddenly I'll have money and I'll be able to keep doing what I'm doing and never lift a finger for myself. That's very destructive thinking. We get what we have earned, one way or another. So if you want to get something, start earning. This is as true on the mundane level as it is for the magical level. I don't know why some people have it in their heads that They are just fully formed prodigies that once they realize that they have the capacity to work magic, that this means they automatically know everything they need to know. Do your studies. Put in the work. Practice. Experiment. Think about things. Ask questions. And when you find answers that make sense to you, find new questions to ask. Continue to explore and expand and test yourself. Grow. Earn. You want to become the best Wiccan you can be, the best priest or priestess, the best magician. You are going to have to earn it. Don't yell at me. Yell at nature. It's how it works. And the very last, these 8 words of the Rede fulfill, and ye harm none, do what ye will. Which again, this goes back to our common everyday practices of if we are going all along in the world, no one's hurting us, we don't go out looking for reasons to hurt other people. We manage our own affairs, we take care of our business, we do what we ought to be doing. And with that, there's great freedom. So that is the long Wiccan Rede. It's taken a little over 45 minutes to get here, so yay, and thank you for everyone who hung in there. Good job. We've just got a little bit more to go through. Obviously, we can't memorize everything about Wicca, witchcraft, or paganism, and some people will find it very tempting not to put forth the effort because they're accustomed to being able to Google any and everything at a moment's notice, or, why do I have to remember? I can just write things down, or I can just ask Google, or this or that. But here's something that's worth thinking about. If we don't know the core tenets of our religion, if we don't know the base practices and how we can be effective in them, if we don't have that foundation of our craft and of our religion, should we really claim to be part of it? Is that an honest thing to do? Are we really representing ourselves in a clear way to other people? It's something to think about. And that's why I've really brought the long Wiccan Rede to your attention, because if you know this, if you understand this, if you wrestle with the ideas within this, you can construct your Wiccan practice. You can know who you are. The techniques at this point are kind of the details that you fill in later. But if you know this, then you can do what needs to be done in your spirituality and in your magical practice. So, if not outright memorize this, I would suggest, at the very least, memorizing the principles, memorizing the ideas. The ideas and what those ideas mean are more important than the exact words used to express them. So in that vein, I will be posting a copy of the Long Rede and the Wicca 101 channel at Blackbird's Brew for easy reference so that you can study it, look at it, put it in your own grimoire, start working on remembering the core bits of it. And of course, you never know. You might be in a situation where you don't have internet access. You might be in a situation in which you don't have your books. There are a million and things that could happen in life that are unexpected, and suddenly you need to be on your A game. And the only thing you will be able to use is really the information inside your head and what you have available around you. So yes, it is important for us to truly know our crafts, to be so fully grounded on it that if we have to, we can operate with just ourselves. And until we get to that point, well, maybe we should be kind of modest about what we claim to be and what we claim to be doing. Food for thought. Now for the homework. Your mission, should you choose to accept it. Question 1. What do you think about the idea of this one single poem being able to explain just kind of the bone structure of Wicca? Question 2. Write down your reaction to each section. What did you think of A, the homespun philosophy, B, the moon lore, C, the four winds, D, the sacred woods, E, the wheel of the year, and F, the last, the finale couplets. And third assignment is meditation. Put on some nature sounds or some soothing instrumental music and think all of this over. Just give it a good chew inside of your head. Journal any thoughts that come to mind, especially about how these ideas might be put into practice, how it affects you, where you think this could take you on a spiritual journey. So, lots there. Very long class. Had to be done. But I'm thinking that next week's class will be much shorter than this, so I hope you will come back for that. I hope this long one has not put you off or scared you away. But for now, I'm going to stop rambling, and I will see you in another video. Bye.